Hi, I'm John Paul Davis and a really warm welcome back to my YouTube channel. What I wanted to talk about today was do another video on narcissism. I did a previous video on narcissism which was about what to do if you have narcissistic traits turned up high, talking about empathy there. And in this video I wanted to look at what to do if you're in a relationship with somebody who you believe is narcissistic. Just to say about this at the outset, that I would not be suggesting that anyone remain in relationship with somebody on a prolonged period of time who was abusive, emotionally, physically, coercively controlling. That's not what this video is about. This is talking about when you're in relationship with somebody, you're choosing to remain in relationship with somebody, perhaps that's a work colleague, so you need some sort of relationship with them, or you're in relationship, you have to have a relationship with an ex for a certain reason who you believe is narcissistic, or actually you are in relationship with somebody on a romantic basis, for example, or friend or family member who has these narcissistic traits turned up high, and you're choosing to remain in relationship. Perhaps they have some insight over it, perhaps they have some accountability, some awareness, some contriteness about particular behaviour. So it's really directed at that area of relationship, not, of course, suggesting that anyone should remain in relationship with somebody who's very dominant narcissism, who's cruel and abusive. I would be the last person that would be just suggesting that somebody would do that. So I talk a little bit towards the end of the video about if you are in relationship and you want to get out of relationship as well. I mentioned that towards the end. But okay, so just going back to what I'm going to talk about in the video, we're going to look at what is narcissism. And the really important reason for looking at that is going on to one of the suggestions that I have for what to hold in mind if you're in relationship with somebody who's narcissistic. And that is, one of the first ones is to know what you're dealing with. With all human beings, everybody's completely unique. There's nobody else like you in the world. There never will be. But there are absolute similarities between human beings. There are particular structures which I think we can identify, particular qualities that we can identify, and therefore, common ways in which we can approach somebody or remain in relationship, in this case with somebody who's narcissistic, in a way that's going to better get our needs met. So it's really important to know why somebody is structured in that way and why they experience things the way that they do as a result of that. It can be very confusing being in a relationship with somebody who's narcissistic, very disorientating, because it can be difficult to understand why they see things in the way that they do. But I hope with this description, which is just how I believe narcissistic people, how they're structured, this is going to help when you're, as I say, choosing to continue in relationship with them. I mentioned in the other video about special worthlessness being a quality of narcissism. I won't go over that again in this video. Perhaps if you go and have a look at the first video for that, it's quite an important quality of narcissism. But for this one, I'm going to focus on the threat, reward, connection model, which is a very familiar model that I use in relationship with self and others. I use it in my book and the course, and generally in how I understand myself and other people. And it works very well for the narcissistic position as well, I think. The model is that we have threat, reward and connection. So we all have these three common parts. The threat part is the part that takes care of our survival. Very important part is where the red flags are. It's the health and safety part. As I say, takes care of our physical survival, psychological survival, the survival of people we love, dependents, etc. In that, therefore, sits fear, because we get frightened when we are threatened or perceive ourselves to be threatened, anger, hatred, revulsion, disgust, all those kind of feelings. And importantly, the dynamic there, which we will be in, if we're looking at ourselves or life or something through that lens, is a victim-perpetrator scenario. So we are the victim, we're being done to by someone, psychological, physical perpetrator, whatever it is. The next one is reward and drives. So I would call it reward in my book, but it's where the drives and the motivations sit. So the things that push us forward in life. And they consist of things like money, status, competing with other people, winning compared to other people, sex, food, gambling. So gambling, because it means it's about the acquisition of more money, also sit there. The sort of addictions sit there as well. So it's about having more than others. One of the things in there which gives us a reward is to have more than others. And you can see why that, from an evolutionary point of view for human beings, is important to us, because I guess the people, firstly, that survived, and secondly, that had more than other people, are the people that have lasted the longest and were more dominant. The thing about the place of reward is whatever the temporary high is that we get from a new car, from a promotion, so an increase in status, some more money, we always need more. So anything that's giving us something there is a temporary high, and it's never going to be enough. Like trying to fill up a cup with no bottom is a way that you could look at it metaphorically. And then there's the place of connection, the third place. And the reason why I put it third is I think generally for human beings, we meet survival first, because we can't connect if we're not alive. So we have to take care of survival first. Then actually, I think naturally for human beings, reward and drives come next. And then there's connection, which is about love of self, love of others. Friendship, affiliation is where empathy for self and others sits. We feel connected to other people through using our imagination for empathy. Empathy being using our imaginations to put ourselves into the shoes of somebody else. So, and that is the place, the connection place, is the place where really sustained human happiness sits. So where meaning and purpose sit. As I say, it's the place of empathy, trust of self, trust of others, self-esteem, self-confidence. But the basic human difficulty is, as I said, we are programmed to survive, to spend more time in threat, and then I think also reward, than we are to be happy on an ongoing basis, which would be much more that place of connection with self and others. And what I believe is the case with narcissistic people is they're dominated, as human beings often are, by threat and by reward, by that coupling. We can't be in threat and reward and connection at the same time. They're mutually exclusive. I mean, you can go between them very quickly. You can go from love to hate very quickly, but they're not places that you can occupy at the same time. And I think narcissistic people are looking out at the world and at themselves with that dominant threat place. So they're looking all the time at, is this thing dangerous or not? And the way they help themselves to feel good, at least temporarily, is through the reward part, the drives, status, money. You'll know that with narcissistic people, how things appear to other people, that they is very important to them. They will see themselves potentially as better than or less than all the time, always gauging themselves against others. So, brands, physical appearance, those sorts of things are very important. And the trouble with being better than or less than all the time, and if that's how I experience my environment, is I'm never the same as. It's not the place of similarities. The place of connection is the place of similarity and connection. So as I say, narcissistic people, I think, combine those two. They bounce between those two, which means that they're only really experiencing anything around them from those two positions. Is it dangerous to me or not? Or is it useful to me or not? Is it useful to me to be able to meet my drives, to get my drives met, to get my desires met, my desire for money, my desire to be better than, my desire to win in competition. Generally to say, we wouldn't be alive, of course, without our survival part. It's incredibly important to have it. The drives, the motivations, the reward part give a lot of novelty, fun, acquisition of money. There's nothing wrong with those things, of course, if they're in balance. So, and I think balance would be a bit of survival, the bit of the threat part to keep us alive, a good helping of the drives. So we're acquiring things, status, money, sex, all those things. To have them in life is important, as long as they're under our sort of conscious management. But then to have most of our energy really in that place of connection, of love of self and others, which requires empathy for self and others. But if I'm only ever seeing the world as either dangerous to me or useful to me as a person, then although I'm locked in to other people because I'm locked in, being hyper vigilant as to whether they're dangerous or not, and I am locked in from the point of view of can they meet my needs or not. I mean, I only get, if that's where I am between threat and reward, my only way really of getting a sense of worth and value is via other people thinking that I'm great. So I'm very much locked into others for my sense of self if I'm narcissistic, for any sense of worth and value. So locked in that way, but unfortunately, because I don't spend much time in connection, I'm actually locked out of true, genuine relationship. So you can see a narcissistic person is locked in with others, but they're also, unfortunately, for their own well-being and for the well-being of others around them, often locked out of relationship with other people. With this threat part and also the reward part, the dynamics that they experience are either victim or perpetrator, and if their threat part step forward, it's always that they're the victim, and also a sort of winner or loser. So often narcissistic people find it very difficult to say sorry or to take accountability. You can see that if they always perceive themselves as the victim in a situation, why would they take accountability? That's genuinely how they will see it. And also, if sorry means losing, if taking accountability means somebody else wins, again, you can see why there's something physiologically which might stop them taking accountability. The place of accepting responsibility, accepting our part in something, is that place of connection. Because again, it requires empathy for others. So talking a bit about empathy, which would be a very familiar quality that people say is narcissistic people struggle with, as I say, it's because they spend less time in the part of connection. But the thing is, we can't really have a relationship with other people without empathy. I can't have a relationship with other people, a real relationship with other people, if I'm not using my imagination at least some of the time to try to imagine what it's like in their shoes. And of course, it makes rupture and repair really difficult in relationship, as you'll probably know if you're in relationship with somebody who is narcissistic. I can only repair if I am using, as I say, well, if I take accountability, if I take responsibility, not blame or fault, but take responsibility for my part in something, and I can see where they're coming from, which I guess is what empathy might look like there. And narcissistic people, because they don't occupy that place of connection, find that very difficult. As I say, they only have their reality often, and their reality, dangerous or not, useful or not. And someone else doesn't really have their own reality at all. Other people don't exist with their own reality, don't really have their own needs, wants, opinions, don't actually exist as separate human beings in some ways for somebody who has these narcissistic traits turned up really high. So what that means is when they're much more likely to rupture in relationship because of this highly sensitive threat part, where they become victim quite quickly in a scenario, and much more likely to rupture because they want to be the winner in any argument or any confrontation. We can all in relationships have a great time when things are going well, when people are feeling good, people are at peace, things are going well. The real test in relationship is what happens with rupture and repair and how we deal with that. And all human beings have to go through it in relationship, whether that's a work relationship, romantic, friendship. And the thing about narcissistic people is they're much more likely to rupture relationship, much more likely to get dysregulated, to see threats, and as I say, to want to go better than, to get to dominate somebody, to get them to bend the knee so that they win. And they're much less likely to find it easy to repair. All human beings will struggle with repair and taking responsibility and accountability, as I say, usually. But narcissistic people will particularly struggle with that process. So they'll rupture more often and struggle to repair. So what does all this mean? As I say, I know that's a lot of theory. It's taken up probably half the video. But the reason for that is really holding all this in mind when you're in a relationship with somebody who is narcissistic and you're trying to move through something or achieve something or achieve a goal, whatever it might be. I think if we know the narcissistic person's makeup, it means that we have a number of things. Firstly, that we'll manage our expectations when we're in relationship with them. As I say, the place of true and real love is in that place of connection. They may have fallen in love and been very loving for the first few months, but after that, for all of us, that dissipates and people revert to their usual ways of being and relating to self and others. And as I say, to have an expectation of somebody who's narcissistic, who's largely therefore occupying threat and reward and not the place of connection, that they're going to be loving and empathetic, it's probably not, it's going to be difficult for them. All human beings can change. Everything can change with people. We're very plastic, our brains. We can absolutely learn empathy. There's plenty of people out there who are trying to learn how to be more empathetic at the moment. So we're able to do it, but is somebody willing? And a lot of people aren't willing, or won't put in the sort of conscious, continuous effort that's required in order to develop something like empathy. But going into a relationship with somebody who's narcissistic, know how they're structured, know how they experience themselves in the world, know how they will experience something that they perceive as criticism. They'll perceive that they're being victimized. And often when people feel victimized, some people will submit. Of narcissistic people, depending on how they are, will come out fighting and become the perpetrator, but they believe they're defending themselves often. And again, as I say, none of this is about excusing anybody's behaviour or saying that it's okay and therefore remain in relationship and take the perpetrator's verbal abuse or whatever. It's just to say that if I'm going to get in relationship, if I'm going to deliver some news or have a negotiation with somebody or raise an issue which I find difficult, it's doing in a particular way, so holding in mind that they're likely to get very dysregulated by information, as I say, which they perceive as criticism. So know the other person so that you can manage your expectations. The other thing to bear in mind is that society very much rewards narcissism. As I said, when I explained about the different parts, there's physiological reasons why threat and reward are going to dominate for us, often at the expense of connection. That's very human to do that. And not only that, in 2022, it's also very rewarded actually, and probably always has been in some ways, but to be quite narcissistic if you're looking at that status, that drive for status and money and fame and power. Again, those things are good as part of life. It's if they dominate at the expense of connection with self and others and love of self and others. So it is very rewarded, and it may also have been one of the reasons why you were attracted to the person in some ways, at least initially. It could be that they were a protector. You know, people who are in survival mode a lot and will dominate a room from that point of view, they can feel like protectors. Somebody who is always in or often in reward and drive and acquires lots of money and status, there is a halo effect of that for other people. It is appealing to other people. We all have our threat, reward and connection part. So we might have been, our threat and reward part might have been attracted to these person's qualities, at least initially. Of course, once we get into relationship, then that need for love and connection often comes through over time, certainly for any sort of sustained long-term relationship with them, or children come into the relationship, it becomes much more important to see that emotional availability, that attunement that come only in that place of connection, that empathy that comes only in that place of connection. But as I say, at least at the outset, it may have been a reason that some of the qualities can be very attractive. I mean, we all have narcissistic traits, and some of them can be very helpful. If we go into an interview believing that we're special and the best and they will always pick us, that can be quite a helpful quality to have. It's just that we don't want it at the expense of relationship with self and others, the expense of connection and trust and empathy. Another thing to say about narcissism is that I genuinely believe with most human beings that if we grew up with a really truly well-loved brain, and therefore that connection part had significant amounts of energy, then that is what we would do. I think most narcissistic people, if they could use threat just when they needed to stay alive and protect their physical and psychological survival, and use drive just to acquire nice stuff, fun stuff, but then have most of their life dominated by connection, by good, sustained, long-term, consistent, nurturing, supportive relationships, I do believe that's what most people would do. That doesn't, of course, excuse all the terrible things that some narcissistic people can do in relationship with other people. But I do believe that it is a matter of nature and also nurture that this develops in people. I think generally it's a wound. It's often the result of trauma, and what we would normally want and hope in relationship is we could get other people to do what we want or meet our needs by inspiring love. What happens with narcissistic people, of course, is because they don't really occupy that place of love that much, they don't really know what true and real love is, they have to work out another way to get their needs met. And that, if I can't do it via love with people, I will cause fear and get angry and try to push people around and try to dominate them. So that's all about the narcissistic person. The other thing that's really important to hold in mind when you're in a relationship with somebody who's narcissistic is to know yourself. Yes, we need to know them, and if we're looking at how to deliver things and how to say things to somebody and how to behave, but primarily as well, in relationship with somebody who's narcissistic, you must know who you are and what you need and what you want. A lot of us have quite a fluid sense of self. We all have a sense of self that's ebbing and flowing. We're connecting and disconnecting internally all the time because of threat, reward and connection. We might think we're great in the morning. Something happens at lunchtime and we think, well, I can't do my job. Why am I doing this? So that's happening all the time. People are changing all the time internally and changing all the time in response to external factors as well. But some people change much more than others. Some people have a much less solid sense of self than other people. And if you're in relationship with somebody who's narcissistic, they are using their trillion neurons to reinforce a position that they're the victim in any situation, and are using those as well to win. So they'll throw everything at a situation to convince you that they are the victim in this situation and that you're somehow doing something to them, because often that's genuinely what somebody believes. And in the face of that, you need to be able to discriminate what's coming in. If somebody's criticizing you and saying you should be more this, less that, you're this, you need to be able to have a boundary in between you and them behind which you know who you are. So if you're getting into those sorts of interactions with somebody who's narcissistic, as I say, you really need to have a very good, strong, grounded sense of who you are. And in order to do that, we have to remain calm in any situation. As soon as we get overly aroused, we get to fear and anger, we will lose connection, we lose memory, we lose cognition. So there is something very much, which again I'm going to come on to, which is about maintaining ourselves in a balanced state if we are in relationship in a conflict situation with somebody who's narcissistic. So you need to have a grounded sense of your own reality. As I've said, somebody who's narcissistic has only their sense of reality. They don't really see yours. So in the face of that, I must have a good grounded sense of my reality. If I go into a situation with somebody who's narcissistic and I'm trying to get something achieved, I need to know what it is I want to say. I need to know what it is that I want to get from that interaction. And I need to know if the conversation starts to go outside of those boundaries, what I'm going to do, which is potentially to leave the conversation and do it again at another time. I really need to trust what I feel. Narcissistic people have very little awareness of what they feel from one moment to the next, and therefore have very little awareness of what somebody else feels, or care sometimes for what somebody else feels. And if they're trying to survive, they don't care what somebody else feels. If they believe someone's a perpetrator, they don't care what somebody feels, as with all of us if we're in a victim-perpetrator type dynamic. So you need to be aware of what you feel from one moment to the next when you're in relationship with somebody who's narcissistic. Are you getting annoyed and therefore dysregulated? Is it therefore time to bring the conversation to an end and come back another time? It's really important when being in a relationship with somebody narcissistic that we are clear, we're calm, and we're boundaried. So that moves us on to the next point, which is being a bit more specific. If I'm going to be in a relationship with somebody in a kind of conflict situation, and that's of course where the problems often are, I do need to do what I can to keep my calm. Now, we're all human, and to be in the face of someone who has such a firm belief in their reality, which can seem so distorted when I'm listening to it, it's highly likely to get triggering for people. So this is no perfect world, but trying to maintain a calmness when I'm in relationship with somebody and not to escalate with them, because as I've said, if you're talking to somebody who, as soon as you escalate, of course you become the perpetrator, or you're already in their mind become a perpetrator, and as soon as you escalate, they're going to want to go higher to win. It's just not going to go anywhere. And that doesn't mean not getting your needs and wants and opinions met in relationship. Of course it doesn't. It just means presenting things in a particular way. From that point of view, I would say assertiveness is not about being able to control somebody else. It's not about getting somebody else to do what I want them to do. Assertiveness is really about being in control of myself. And the way I see things, it would mean being in a place of balance if I'm in relationship, both with myself but also others. And therefore, I am not getting very frightened, and then I would avoid saying things, and I'm not getting very angry, which is the position I'd be in when I say things that lack empathy, and again, I'm not going to get my needs met. And if you're looking at how to keep yourself in balance, that is really what my book is about. It's what the course is about, and it's a more general lifestyle type thing, looking at your thoughts, feelings, body behaviours, how they all keep you in alignment internally, that sort of balanced nervous system, which is the place where I'm going to be able to hold a boundary with somebody, where I'm going to remember what my boundaries are, where I'm going to remember what it is that I wanted to say and be able to communicate that. My voice might shake when I do it, but I'm going to be able to communicate it if I'm in this place of balance physiologically. A lot of people say with narcissistic people to sort of keep the emotion out of it, and I can understand why people say that. I think what they mean is not escalate, is not get angry. Again, with the best will in the world, that's not always going to be possible, but not to get angry, not to get fearful, keep the emotion out of it. There's something called grey rocking out there, which is, I can't remember who it is, but has suggested as a way of responding to people who are narcissistic. And that is to, as I say, keep the emotions to a minimum, not to get engaged emotionally, even to keep eye contact to a minimum, keep body language, all those kind of things, keep it grey. The reason being, someone isn't then being able to hook into that. And I think that can be quite a useful idea if you're looking at being in a work relationship with someone. If you're looking at a romantic relationship, though, we don't want to be spending our lives grey rocking someone. If you're in a romantic relationship, presumably what you need and want from that relationship is to love and be loved. And that is not the place of grey rocking. Certainly as a short-term strategy, though, it can be helpful. The next thing I would say to hold in mind is people can feel quite powerless in relation to narcissistic people because, as I say, they so firmly hold the belief of their reality, and their reality can seem quite different to your reality. But important to remember throughout all this is that your power is where you direct your attention. They can really hold your attention. People can spend a lot of time thinking about, talking about with friends, the narcissistic person and their behaviour, and we all need to process what's happening for us in relationship, whether that can be in therapy, whether that's with friendships, family. So I can understand why they take up a lot of energy. It can take up a lot of thought, feeling, behavioural energy relating to somebody who's narcissistic. The thing is, as I say, all human beings are able to change. It's just that some people aren't willing. Also, there might be people who are willing, but then they need to be able to put, as I say, the conscious work in to do that on a moment by moment, day by day basis. And often somebody who's narcissistic, because they're in drive so much, that's difficult. You know, we're pattern forming creatures, we are programmed to do in the future what we've done in the past. So these are hard habits to change, although they are absolutely possible to change. You know, primarily it'd be looking at developing empathy, for example, but it is hard. And if you've suggested it to somebody, if you've had conversations with them and made it clear, then really, rather than, I think, arguing with somebody or consistently criticising or picking them up on things, there is just that, hopefully it percolates through. If somebody loves you enough, hopefully over time they will do that. But if over time you notice that there are no changes being made, and that despite what somebody's saying, there isn't a consistent change in behaviour or a consistent effort being made to develop the new skills that are necessary to be the antidote to narcissism, then I think you really have to hold in mind whether it's something you want to continue in. You're nobody's carer, you're nobody's therapist. There are absolutely people out there who have truly well-loved brains as they were growing up, or have who didn't, but subsequently developed those aspects of self, who you can have good, healthy, nurturing, supportive relationships with. So if you're looking at what you give your attention to, really hold that in mind as well. And as well as focusing on the narcissistic person, as I say, they're really drawing of attention. I hope one of the things that's come through in this video is also looking at putting attention inwards at yourself, what you feel, what you need, what you want. And I always have a hope for people that, because I know in my career that people can do things differently and things can change. Things can change profoundly with human beings. Their relationship with self and relationship with others can change profoundly, but sometimes they don't, and sometimes people are better left untrusted. And that's only a decision that you can make. But if you are looking to leave a relationship, if it's been a long time, if there have been no changes and you're finding it very difficult to do that, I imagine it's not because you haven't been told by other people that this person is difficult and you deserve better. It just is difficult for people. I mean, often when we're in relationships with somebody who's narcissistic, it can be repeating early relationships for us. So if we were in a trauma bond with our caregivers, although we don't like it, we had to stay then. So people very much can lose their power in situations like this because it's familiar for them to be in a relationship with somebody who isn't truly loving. This actually, it gets confused in our minds, and sort of fear and love all bleed into each other, anger and love, controlling behaviour and love. And if we've never really had that honest, true experience of real love in our lives, we might stay for much longer because it's familiar as much as we dislike it. And one thing to hold in mind here is that if we stay in relationship with somebody for long periods of time, we might become very similar to them. That's of course the difficulty. One of the reasons why a narcissistic person might have been attracted to you could have been because of your empathy, those qualities. But if we keep coming up against somebody, if things keep escalating, that part of us, we all have that part, that fight or flight part. And if we keep getting triggered in relation to them, in some ways, the backwards and forwards of things, we can have that state of mind visited on us consistently. So at some point it becomes a choice as to what we want to do with our time and attention. And if it's difficult for you to leave, as I say, it can be important to seek help in relationship with, say, a therapist or somebody else who's going to help you make those changes. And it's often those changes start with looking at relationship with self, actually. And that's the point that I'll finish on now, which is that if you do get out of relationship, it's really important to understand what it is that meant that we stayed so long in a relationship with somebody. That is not from the point of view of fault or blame. I did mention this in the first video. It's from the point of view of there are certain personality types that work with narcissistic people. I don't mean that they enjoy the experience. They might be very distressed, but they sort of coexist. There are a number of different ideas around that. Some people are very empathetic with others at their own expense. They sort of grew up in environments which was all about self-sacrifice, all about other people's needs at their own expense. That was what they were loved for. So they might absolutely repeat that dynamic in relation to somebody narcissistic and orbit around the narcissistic person. As much as I say, it's not a happy place for them. It's a familiar place, and they're structured in a way that they can do that. So there are people who are very empathetic who remain. I read about people, sort of the idea of an echoist, the myth of Narcissus, which is where the name came from. There was somebody in that who just echoed back everything that Narcissus said, probably because of a very fluid sense of self of their own. And again, so there are different ideas as to what makes somebody or means that somebody will coexist. There's another, if you Google covert narcissism, it's interesting because there are different forms of narcissism as well. There are narcissistic people who you might describe as more thin-skinned, so get more emotional, more impacted, more affected, do experience empathy, and they look very different to a grandiose, hurtful, manipulative, dominant narcissist, but they do share some qualities which, again, if you're looking back at why somebody might have got into a relationship with somebody narcissistic, there could be on some level some shared values. So it isn't for me to say what it is that's about somebody's personality that means that this was a dynamic that they remained in. It is important, though, I think, to know what it is and to know how you're structured. The more you know about yourself, the more awareness you have about yourself, the better that's going to be, not just in romantic relationships or work relationships, but everything in life. And if you're looking at myself and sense of self, how fluid is it? Is it solid? How do I make it more solid? How do I better get to know myself? That is a great quality and skill to have through all things in life. And that's it. Hopefully that was helpful. Please do comment beneath if you have anything you want to add. If you've been in a relationship with somebody narcissistic and you have ideas about it and things that have worked, please do give those comments. That would be great for other people to hear. It'd be really interesting for me to hear. If you like the video, please do like it. Please do subscribe to the channel for more content. And of course, also from a therapy point of view, I work with people who have narcissistic traits and developing empathy and that kind of thing. We can do that. And also, of course, I work with people all the time who are in relationship with people who are narcissistic and looking at all the types of issues that I've mentioned in this video. So please do get in touch if you want to. And thank you for listening.